We continue now at the top of Daf Vav Amud Aleph in Meseches Moed Kattan. This is Moed Kattan Daf 6a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said if you have a field where there was a kever that was lost there, but then you see a bunch of trees planted in the field, so you can assume that the kever was plowed over. So the Gemara said, why can you assume that? Maybe it's towards the outside of the field. Gemara says, no, the trees are all along the boundary of the field, so you know, again, all the way up to the outside, there was it would have been plowed over in order to plant the trees. But the Gemara says, "V'dilma tuma mi gavoy v'ilanos mi baroi." What's the big proof? If the trees are all in a row at the boundary of the field, so maybe the tuma is on the inside of the field, and maybe the trees are on the outside of the field. As Rashi over here says, "V'dilma tuma mi gavoy v'lo bein ho'ilanos." It's not between the trees. Maybe the tuma is inside, away from the trees. V'lo nechrash b'makom tuma. So maybe it wasn't plowed over in the area of tuma. So how can you be so sure that the kever got plowed over? So to that, the Gemara answers, b'misuvachin. Rashi says, misuvachin she'enon omdin b'shura achas. They're not all in one row. Savav hagvulim. The case isn't where the trees are all just around the boundary and only there. Elamu ravin b'chol hasada. They're mixed up throughout. They're scattered throughout the whole field. Devadei nechrash kol hasada b'shvil ho'ilanos. Most certainly, the entire field was plowed because of these trees. And again, you can assume that the area of the gravesite was plowed over. V'bayisem, if you want, I could say another answer. Ha'aman, we said before, ein marchikin sion mimokum tumah shelo lahafsid es Eretz Yisrael. Wherever you put the marker, you don't put it far away from the area of tumah, because we don't want to lose space and declare places in Eretz Yisrael to be tumah when they are not. And therefore, as Rashi over here says, v'kevan shesamach li'ilanos hatzion. If you see the marker near the trees, v'adai tumah bein ho'ilanos. Certainly the tumah was between the trees. V'nechrash b'shvil ho'ilanos, and therefore it was certainly plowed over because of the trees. The Gemara continues quoting what we said earlier. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheyesham zaken o Talmud. You can't rely on these kind of indications to determine what happened with this field, whether it was plowed over, whether it wasn't plowed over. You have to have an elder, a Talmud Chacham there. They have to be able to testify what is the situation with this field. Lafi she'ein hakol b'kim b'davar, because not everybody is an expert in this matter. Amar Abaye says, Shema mino, you see from this, Tzur b'mei Rabbana, when you have a Talmud Chacham, De'ika b'masa, if he's in the city, Kol mili demasa oleh ramya. Everything that's going on in the city, he needs to be aware of what's going on. Rashi says, Kol mili demasa ramya oleh ramya. The Talmud Bakiyu, because he's a Talmud who's an expert, he's the one that has to know what's going on. You turn to this Talmud Chacham to find out the status of the grave sites in this field. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Motza Evan Mitsuyenes. Let's say you find a stone that's marked, Tachteha Tameh, underneath it is going to be Tameh. Rashi will explain this. Shtayim, if you find two stones, so Im Yesh Sid Beinehen, if you have lime between the two stones, so Beinehen Tameh, that indicates that the Tumah is between the two stones. Vim Ein Sid Beinehen, but if there's no lime between the two stones, so then it's considered like two separate indications. Beinehen is tar, between the stones is going to be tar. It's just going to be that each stone underneath that particular stone is going to be tameh. Rashi over here says, Motza Evan Achas Mitsuyenes Besid Tachteh Tameh. First Rashi says what it means is, if you have a stone that's marked that it has plaster underneath, so that indicates that it's tameh. Umipi Mori Hazakin, he says, from my Rebbe, he learned as follows, Evan Achas Mitsuyenes Sheyesh Sid Al Gaba. Case over here is you have a stone, and it's marked with the lime on top of the stone, not beneath it. And the chiddush over here is you don't have to assume that the marking is a little bit distant from the stone and distant from the tumah. Because when you have a stone that's already high up, it's easy to spot. Anyone coming close to that stone will see that there's this mark of lime. Will see that there's this mark of a gravesite. Kodem she'enogeh before he touches it. But if it's not stone, so then marchikin lotzion besamach. Then you have to actually distance the mark a little bit away to zimnin lochazitzion ad asi v'nago mile, because then sometimes you won't see it right away, and it's going to be too late. By the time you notice it, you're already going to make an ohel over the tumah. So in other words, according to Rashi's second explanation over here, the idea is you can assume if you see the sid right on top of the stone, you can assume it wasn't marked off a little distance from the tumah. You can assume it's right above the tumah. There's tumah right beneath. In any case, by shtayim mitsuyanos, let's say I have two rocks, and they have these markers on them. So tachtei and tameh, so then underneath them is tameh. Aval beineim, what about between them? So it depends. Im yesh sid beineim al ha'aretz, if you have lime between them on the earth, tameh, then you say between them is tumah. The misham tziyonhu, because again, it's being marked off as an area of a kever, so you can assume between the stones is going to be tameh. And so now the Gemara asks, V'af agav delek chorish, is this true even though there's no sign that there was any plowing? As Rashi over here says, even though there was no plowing done between the two stones, still tahar kilek sid, still as long as there's no lime, we're going to assume it's tar, even though there was no plowing to again plow over the gravesite, we're just going to assume it's tar. Is that really true? But we learned in a brisa. Like we said, if you find one stone that's marked, so beneath it is tamei. Shtayim, it says over here that if you have two stones that are marked, it depends on the plowing. And if there is an indication that there was plowing between them, beinei and tar, so then between them is tar. And if not, then between them is tamei. So apparently, if you have a situation where you have no indication of plowing, it's going to be a problem. That contradicts what we just said. We just said if the two stones are marked and there's no line between them, you assume it's tar. Now we're saying no, you only assume it's tar if there was plowing between them. Otherwise you're going to assume it's tamei. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Papa says, Hacha over here, Kishasid Shafoch al Roshei. And the case is, there's lime on top of it's like spilled over on top of the stones. Umaruda Lakan, it's spilled over in various directions. In that situation, it depends on being plowed over. Iyika Choresh Beinei, and if you see that it was plowed between Beinei and tar, then you can say it's tar. Diemar Machmas Choreshu, because then you can assume that it all spilled over because you were plowing in the area, it caused the lime to spill over. V'lo, and if not, then you have to assume that was lime that was purposely placed between the stones, v'tamei, and it's tamei. In other words, the time that you're looking for indications of charisha is when there is sid between the two stones. But if there's absolutely no sid between the two stones, then you can assume that it is indeed tahor. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravasi says, Meitzar echod mitzuyanhu. Let's say you have a field and just one boundary of the field is marked off. So hu tamei v'chol asad kula tahora. So that meitzar, that side of the field is tamei, but the entire rest of the field is going to be tar. Just that boundary that's marked off is tamei. Shnayim, let's say two borders of the field are marked off. Heim tamein, they're tamei v'chol asad kula tahora. The whole field is tahor. Shlosha, let's say three of them are marked off. Heim tamein, they're all tamei v'chol asad kula tahora, but the rest of the field is tar. Arba, but if all four sides of the field are marked off, then you say hein tahor, and then they're going to be considered tahor. V'chol asad kula tameya. You have to assume in that one case that the whole field is tamei. Diamar mar, because the master said, "En marchikin sion mimakom tumah." You're not supposed to distance the marking of the gravesite far from the actual tumah. Shelo lahavzid es Eretz Yisrael, like we said, not to lose out land in Eretz Yisrael. You don't want to declare areas tamei that are really not tamei. And Rashi explains, "En marchikin sion mimakom tumah ulahachet sayin kol arba meitzarav." That's why the person marked all four sides of the field to hey kol asad nitzma. That's to show that the whole field is tamei. Uvitzion de meitzar echad lo sagi. It's not going to be enough in that case to just do one side. Lakula, that's not going to say the whole field is tamei. Dein marchik and tziyam mimakam tumah, because again, it's not supposed to be far away from the area of tumah. So if the whole field is tamei, you have to mark all four sides. You can't have the marking far away from the actual tumah, so you're going to have to mark off all four sides of the field. The Gemara continues, v'yotzen afal kilayim. You can also go out to inspect for kilayim. And the Gemara now asks, "V'kilayim b'cholo shel moed nafkinan." Is it really true that we go out to inspect the fields to make sure there's no kilayim growing on chol moed? Is that really the case? So we have a contradiction. It says, "Be'echod ba'adar," on the first of Adar, mashmiyan ala shkolim v'ala kilayim. We make announcements regarding the collection of the machatzes hashekel and regarding kilayim, warning people about kilayim. B'chamisha osir bo, on the 15th of Adar, korin es ha-megillah bekrachim. That's when we read the Megillah in the walled cities. V'yotzin lekavetz es hadrachim u'lesakin harchovos. V'lomud ha-mikvos, and we go to clear away any thorns in the paths, and we fix the streets, and we measure the mikvos. V'yosin kol tzarchei rav, and we do everything that's needed for the public. U'mitzayin es hakvaros, and we also mark off the graves. V'yotzin ala kilayim, and we send out the shluchim for the kilayim that's on the 15th of Adar, so it's not on chol moed. And so the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, that's a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Chad Omer, one says, kan bebechir, kan be'ofil. It depends if you're talking about the early growth, or are you talking about the later growth? V'chad Omer, the other one says, kan bizroim, kan b'yerakos. It depends if you're talking about the plants, the seeds, or are you talking about the vegetables. And Rashi over here explains, kan bebechir, kan be'ofil, ala bechiros yotzim, b'tesvav ba'adar, and the stuff that grows early, so you go out on the 15th of Adar. Ala afelos, and then there's other stuff that grows a little later, so b'cholo shel moed the Pesach, that's when we go out, we do the inspections on chol moed Pesach. Bizroim, meaning ala tzvua, the seeds means to say the grain, so yotzin b'tesvav ba'adar shekodmin li'yerakos, because the grain would grow before the vegetables. And again, for the vegetables, that's when you'll go out on chol moed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rav Yochanan. Ravasi says in the name of Rav Yochanan, Lo Shanu, this idea that we go out, let's say on the 15th of Adar, Chol Moed, we only wait that long, Ela she'ein nitzon nikar, only in a case where the blossom wasn't recognizable earlier than that. You couldn't tell there was a kalayim issue earlier, so then we go out again on the 15th of Adar, Chol Moed. Avol nitzon nikar, but if you have a situation where the blossom is recognizable, you can tell that there's kalayim over here, Yotzin Alei, and then you go out even earlier in order to uproot the kalayim. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna b'cholo shel moed nafkin. And why is it specifically that we send out these people on chol moed in order to uproot the kilayim? Amar Rav Yaakov, Amar Rav Yochanan, mishum schar pu'ulo demos ligabon. Rav Yaakov says in the name of Rav Yochanan, the reason is because workers are very cheap at that point in time. There's not a lot of work you can do on chol moed. So since the labor is cheaper, so therefore that's the ideal time to send out the workers to do this. Amar Rav Zvid v'yiteimer Rav Misharshi. Rav Zvid says, and some people say it's Rav Misharshi that says, Shma mino, you see from this, ki yahavinan lu schar mitrumas halishka yahavinan. You see that when we pay these workers, yahavinan luhu, you see that when we pay these workers to uproot the kilayim, we're paying them from the trumas halishka, meaning we're paying them from the money of hektish, and that's why we want to pay them when it's the cheapest, when the labor is not very expensive. We want to save the money of hektish. Because if you think that we force the Baal Habayis, in other words, let's say the worker goes out, spots some kilayim in a particular field, maybe you would think that the Baal Habayis of that field needs to pay the worker to uproot it. It can't be. If you thought that, my nafkal and minayu, what do we care to do it at chol moed, to do it at the cheaper time? Doesn't make sense. Kol kamet, whatever the proper price is, they should pay. We could send them out at any time, and whatever the going rate is at that time, that's what the Baal Habayis would pay. Obviously, the reason we're doing it specifically on Chol Moed is because we're using the public funds of the Beis HaMikdash. We don't want to use more public funds than necessary. And the Gemara continues, V'ad kama, as Rashi over here says, V'ad kama have kilayim d'chayv levadla. What's considered enough kilayim? What's enough of a mixture of seeds that you now need to be mevatel this kilayim? Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak says, Ka'osa sheshaninu. It's like that which we learned, Kol sa'ah sheyesh ba, any saw that has within it, and we'll continue this discussion in the next video on Daf Vav Amud Beis.